Hey guys, Brian here with a quick video. The other day somebody asked me a great question. He's single, he wants to get married, and he's trying to figure out how do I wait patiently but also proactively. And he just asked, are there Psalms that would help me with that? And I thought it was a great question because the Psalms are God's prayer book, and they give us words when we don't really know what to pray ourselves. So let's dive in. Hopefully you can see that on the screen here. It's Psalm 27. And our theme verse is really verse 14 there at the end. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. And so you guys can see there's this aspect of waiting, trusting God, but also being strong and being proactive. And I really think the rest of the psalm fills that in. So let's dive in. I want to talk about 9 different ways we can really be proactive, but also trust God and balance those two. So first, focus on God's character. In verse 1, David calls God his light, his salvation, and his stronghold. So obviously there's a lot of other things we could pull out of the psalm about God's character, but the point is to focus on him. That's our starting point while we're waiting. The second thing is that when we are trusting in God, when we are leaning into him, then we're not afraid anymore. So in verses 2 and 3, in David's situation, he's got enemies who are coming against him. But he says, even if a whole army was surrounding me, even if war broke out, I would still be confident because I'm trusting in God. And obviously your situation of being single, a little bit different than worry about going to war, but I think the psalm can apply to anybody's situation. And so when we put our focus on God, we're not afraid of what we're facing anymore. And kind of a little more to the point about fear, a lot of times when guys are single, they can start to fear the women around them. Not physically so much, but fearing rejection. And when that happens, you can kind of keep yourself at arm's length, not move toward them, not be a good friend. But when we focus on God's character, we can serve the people around us and love them. Okay, number 3, pursue intimacy with God. Looking at verse 4 here, David says, "One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple." So even more than David wants his circumstances to change, he wants to know God. And that's the calling for you too, while you're wrestling through singleness, to keep focusing on God, to make him your greatest pursuit, and to ask him to help you to get to the place where you want him more than you want to get married. Okay, number 4. Pursue intimacy, but do it in community. So in verses 4 through 6, David talks about God's temple, and I think when he talks about his shelter and his tent in verse 5, it's really just synonyms for the temple where Israel came together and worshiped God. So a lot of times when guys are single, it's easy to feel discouraged, to get isolated, to just kind of go out on your own, and that's usually not a good idea. So it's important to keep showing up to church, keep staying in community, and ask the people around you to support you, let them know you're struggling, and to help you stay on track. Number 5, remember God's work in your past. So looking at verse 9 here, David says, "Turn not your servant away in anger, O you who have been my help." So he just looks back on his life and he remembers that God's helped him. And he's confident God will do it again. So where in your life, you might be struggling with singleness now, but you've probably seen God show up in your life at other times. So how can that lead you to trust him now? Number 6, ask for guidance. In verse 11 actually, David says, "Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies." So basically, David is saying, God, show me your character. Show me what it means to live a life pleasing to you in my particular circumstances. And so, again, singleness can be a tough time, but what would it look like for you to have God show you his character, his heart, and to have that become more real to you in your everyday life? In a lot of ways, being single is a great time for that because you don't have some of the other distractions, some of the obligations that are good, but do come along with dating and especially when you get married. Okay, number 7, keep asking for what you want. In verse 12, David just shares with God what's in his heart. He basically prays that his enemies wouldn't catch up with him. And so kind of, applying that to the situation of singleness, just ask God for a wife, ask him to provide for you and don't stop asking. He wants to hear from you. Number 8, expect to see God's goodness while you wait. In verse 13, David says, "I believe that I will look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." So he probably was referring to his prayer in verses 4 through 6 to have free access to worshiping with God's people again, which of course he couldn't guarantee. That might not have happened. And so for your situation, to be able to come to God and say, "I believe I will see your goodness now. Even though I'm single, I believe you can show up in my life in this area and many others too." So many times when we're not getting what we want, we can get down on God and start to functionally doubt that he's a good God. I can remember during grad school being just super lonely and really, really wanting to get married. But, it was just kind of crickets all around me. And I can just remember crying out to God in the parking garage, like, "God, I'm so frustrated. What are you doing? Where are you?" I had really started to doubt his goodness. But David calls us to hold on to that. And then finally, tell others. This is the first and only time in the Psalm where David isn't speaking to himself or praying to God. And then he says, "Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." It's amazing what happens when we're struggling, but we take our eyes off of ourselves and start to love the people around us. Even though our circumstances may not change, all of a sudden we feel so much better because we're living out of the design to love others that God has for us. So there you go. 9 ways to wait for God, but to do it proactively and not passively. As a quick recap, number 1, meditate on God's character. Number 2, when we focus on God's character, we won't fear others. Number 3, pursue intimacy with God above anything else. Number 4, pursue intimacy in community with others. Number 5, remember God's work in your past. Number 6, ask for guidance. Number 7, keep asking for what you want. Number 8, expect to see God's goodness while you wait. And then finally, number 9, tell others, encourage them to pursue God too. So, switching back here, I just want to leave you guys with a challenge. It's so easy to hear stuff like this and to say, "Oh, that's great. God's word is awesome." And then we don't do anything with it. But God says that now that we know these things, we'll be blessed if we do them in John 13. So I want to just kind of ask you guys, of these 9 things, which was the one most helpful to you? And how are you going to start living it out? To help you take action, I've created a quick worksheet you can download just below this video. If you guys are looking for more resources, I want to encourage you to check out the homepage on my website. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see I have dedicated resource pages for people who are single, dating, and then on into engagement and marriage. My heart is really to walk you through that journey so that you can have a healthy marriage that glorifies God, serves the people in your life, and brings you and your future spouse joy. So that's it for today. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you again soon.